Hey everyone, we just hit 1,000 subscribers. Thank you for your support. If you haven't subscribed yet, 90% of you are missing out on our space and sci-fi content. My goal is 10k subscribers by next year, and every bit of support helps. Now, let's get into the story. The discreet manila envelope had arrived 6 months ago, slipped under my office door at MIT on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday morning. Inside, I found a single page with 5 equations I'd never seen before. Equations that shouldn't have been possible. I spent 3 days without sleep, trying to solve them. When I finally did, the implications were staggering. Someone had developed a mathematical framework for quantum tunneling that was decades ahead of current theory. But what really kept me awake was the question: who sent them? I got my answer on day 4. Dr. Sarah Chen. The man's voice startled me from my work. I hadn't heard him enter my office. He wore an immaculate black suit that screamed government, but not any agency I recognized. I believe you've had time to review our equations. I gestured to my whiteboard, covered in frantic calculations. They're remarkable. Impossible, but remarkable. The implications for quantum mechanics alone. Classified at the highest levels, he interrupted smoothly. I'm Colonel Marcus Hayes. We've been watching your work on quantum entanglement for some time. He placed another envelope on my desk. We'd like to offer you a position. The salary figure made me choke on my coffee, but it was the project description that really caught my attention. Practical applications of transdimensional quantum tunneling. Is this real? I asked, my hand trembling slightly as I held the paper. Hayes' expression remained neutral. Very. But before we proceed, I need you to understand something, Dr. Chen. If you accept, your old life ends today. No contact with family or friends for the duration of your contract. No publications. No outside communication. You'll effectively cease to exist. I should have said no. Should have remembered my mother's warnings about deals that seemed too good to be true. Should have thought about my sister's upcoming wedding, my students, my research. Instead, I heard myself say, when do I start? That was 6 months ago. Now I stood in the middle of the Nevada desert, watching a black helicopter descend from an empty sky. The infamous Area 51 sprawled before me. A complex of buildings that looked nothing like the grainy photos conspiracy theorists passed around online. It was larger, more modern, and far more intimidating. Dr. James Morrison met me at the landing pad. His weathered face and sharp eyes suggested someone who'd seen things that defied explanation. "Welcome to Groom Lake," he said, not smiling. "I'll be your project supervisor." The facility's interior was a maze of white corridors and security checkpoints. Each door required different combinations of retinal scans, keycards, and numerical codes. The deeper we went, the more I noticed subtle oddities. Walls that seemed to bend at impossible angles. Lights that cast shadows in wrong directions. "The equations you solved," Morrison said as we descended, in an elevator that definitely went down farther than the building should have allowed, were a test. We needed someone who could think beyond conventional physics. Someone who could look at impossible things without breaking. What impossible things? He smiled thinly. "You'll see." The elevator stopped at sub-level 7. The doors opened to reveal the massive chamber filled with humming equipment and dozens of scientists working at stations that looked more advanced than anything I'd ever seen. But all of that faded to background noise when I saw it. Through triple-pane glass, reality itself seemed to tear open. A perfect circle of swirling darkness, 10 feet in diameter, hung suspended in a containment field. The edges rippled like black mercury, defying every law of physics I thought I knew. "We call it the Gate," Morrison said quietly. "It appeared 18 months ago during a failed quantum experiment. We've sent probes through, but the data we get back..." He paused, running a hand through his grey hair. "It doesn't make sense. We need someone who can help us understand what we're seeing. Someone like you." I stepped closer to the glass, mesmerized by the gate's impossible geometries. "What happens to the probes?" "They send back readings for exactly 43 minutes and 17 seconds. Then we lose contact. Every single time." Morrison's voice dropped lower. "But here's the thing, Dr. Chen. The data we receive in those minutes suggests an environment that shouldn't exist, an entire world that operates under different physical laws." I turned to face him, my scientific curiosity warring with a deep, instinctive dread. "You want me to study it?" His expression was grim. "No, Dr. Chen, we want you to go through it." That's when the alarms began to scream. But they weren't normal alarms. The sound seemed to come from inside my head, a wailing that twisted through dimensions that shouldn't exist. And as I watched, horrified, the gate began to pulse with a light that wasn't light at all. "It's never done this before," Morrison whispered, his face pale. "Something's coming through." The thing that emerged from the gate wasn't solid. It moved like smoke, but reflected light like oil on water. Tendrils of impossible geometry testing the air of our reality. Within seconds, the containment field sensors were screaming warnings in a dozen languages. "Full lockdown," Morrison shouted into his comm unit. "I want every blast door between here and the surface sealed now." Scientists scattered as emergency protocols engaged. Through the chaos, I noticed something odd. The entity wasn't attacking. It was writing. Equations appeared in the air where its tendrils moved, glowing symbols that burned themselves into my retinas. "Dr. Chen," Morrison grabbed my arm. "We need to move. The containment field won't hold." "Wait," I interrupted, stepping closer to the glass. "I recognize these equations. They're similar to the ones you sent me, but..." My voice trailed off as I worked through the mathematics in my head. "Oh God, what is it?" "They're not equations for crossing dimensions," I whispered. "They're coordinates. It's giving us an address." The entity pressed against the containment field, its form resolving into something almost humanoid. Where its face should have been, I saw only swirling patterns that hurt to look at, but somehow I knew it was looking directly at me. "Sarah Chen?" a voice echoed in my mind. "The beacon calls." Morrison's face went ash white. "How does it know your name?" Before I could answer, the containment field failed. Alarms blared as emergency doors slammed shut, trapping us in the chamber with the entity. Morrison drew a sidearm I hadn't known he was carrying, but the entity ignored him completely. It flowed toward me like a river of fractalized mercury. I should have been terrified, but all I felt was an overwhelming sense of recognition. "You have already come through once," the voice in my head said, "and you will come through again. Time moves differently between spaces." I started to protest, but then the memories hit me. Memories that couldn't be mine, but were. Walking through the gate, meeting beings of pure mathematics, learning truths about reality that no human mind was meant to comprehend. Morrison was shouting something, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. The entity's form had completely surrounded me now, its substance like cold fire against my skin. "The others are coming," it warned. "The old networks are failing. Reality grows thin. You must remember what you learned when you crossed over. Remember why you came back." "I don't understand," I gasped. The air around me was beginning to shimmer with quantum possibilities, timeline fragments showing me glimpses of other versions of myself. In one, I was wearing a strange black suit, programming something into a small device. In another, I was standing before a massive gate that dwarfed the one in our facility. "You will," the entity promised. "But first, you must forget. The knowledge must come in the right order, or all falls to entropy." It raised what might have been a hand, the last thing I heard, before consciousness fled. was Morrison shouting my name. When I woke up in the medical bay 3 days later, I remembered nothing of what the entity had said. But on every surface of the containment chamber, walls, floors, even ceiling, it had left the same message written in mathematical symbols that defied our understanding. The gate opens in 3 days. The observer must cross. The circle must close. Morrison was waiting by my bedside, looking like he hadn't slept since the incident. How much do you remember? Everything up until the containment field failed, I lied. Something deep in my subconscious was screaming at me to keep quiet about the fragmented memories, the impossible knowledge that flickered just at the edges of my awareness. He nodded slowly. The entity left behind some sort of residue. We're still analysing it, but preliminary results suggest it's some kind of programmable matter. Dr. Chen. He hesitated. The mathematical models suggest the gate is becoming unstable. If those equations are correct, we have 3 days before it either collapses or becomes permanent. I sat up, ignoring the pounding in my head. You still want me to go through? We need to know what's on the other side, what we're dealing with. He handed me a tablet showing sensor readings from the chamber. Whatever that entity was, it reconfigured the gate somehow. The quantum signature has changed. It's calling to something. Or someone, I thought, but didn't say. When do we start? I asked instead. Morrison's expression was grim. Now. Whatever's coming, we need you ready. He helped me stand. There's something else you should see. After you lost consciousness, we found these in your pockets. He handed me a small plastic bag. Inside was a set of equations, written in my own handwriting. Equations I had no memory of writing. The paper was aged, yellowed, like it had been written years ago. The final line made my blood run cold. When you read this, you'll have forgotten everything. That's okay, you'll remember when you need to. Just know that none of this is an accident. You chose this. All of you did. The signature at the bottom was mine. The date listed was 3 days from now. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of preparation and testing. The suit they designed for my crossing looked almost organic, its surface rippling with quantum-stabilized materials I'd never seen before. Each component had been engineered to maintain molecular cohesion in an environment where our physics might not apply. The life support systems will last 72 hours, Dr. Helen Park explained, as she helped me into the suit. Her expertise in xenobiology had led to several breakthrough discoveries in how matter behaved near the gate. After that, I'm dead, I finished. The suit felt alive against my skin, adapting to my body temperature and movements. The neural interface is the key component, she continued, attaching sensors to my temples. It'll translate any data your brain receives into something you can comprehend. Without it, exposure to transdimensional space could drive you insane instantly. I thought about the entity's visit, how its true form had been hidden behind patterns my mind could barely process. Has anyone else gone through before? Successfully, I mean? Helen's hesitation was barely noticeable. No comment, but I will say this, the suit's recorder picked up traces of similar materials around the gate. Someone, or something, has crossed between realities wearing technology very much like this. The implications made my head spin. I was about to ask more questions when Morrison entered the lab, his face grave. We have a problem, he announced. The gate's deteriorating, faster than predicted. Timeline's been moved up. Dr. Chen needs to go through tonight. Tonight? Helen protested. We haven't completed the final calibrations. No choice, look at this. He held up his tablet, showing a real-time feed from the containment chamber. The gate's edges were becoming fuzzy, its perfect circular shape beginning to distort. We're seeing microfractures in local space-time. If we wait much longer, we risk a cascading reality failure. I watched the gate's surface ripple with new patterns, remembering the entity's warning. The old networks are failing. Reality grows thin. How long do I have to prepare? 3 hours, Morrison said. After that, either you go through voluntarily, or the gate's collapse tears this facility apart. He paused. There's something else you should know. We found more equations hidden in the containment chamber. They're, well, see for yourself. The tablet showed photos of mathematical symbols etched into the quantum-reinforced walls. They showed up under ultraviolet light, glowing with an impossible radiance. As I studied them, my head began to ache with half-remembered knowledge. They're instructions, I said, the words coming from somewhere deep in my subconscious, for building something on the other side, something that will let me come back. Morrison and Helen exchanged worried looks. How do you know that? Helen asked carefully. I shook my head, trying to clear it of the strange certainty. I don't know. I just do. Your neural patterns have been unstable since the entity incident, Helen said, checking her monitors. We're seeing spikes of activity in regions of your brain that shouldn't even exist. It's like you're remembering things that haven't happened yet. Or that happened in another timeline, I thought, but didn't say. The note in my own handwriting weighed heavy in my pocket. You chose this. All of you did. 2 hours and 53 minutes, Morrison announced. Dr. Chen, are you sure about this? Once you cross over, we'll have no way to bring you back. The recall beacon is theoretical at best. I looked at my reflection in the suit's polished surface. For a moment, I thought I saw another version of myself looking back older, changed by whatever waited on the other side of the gate. I'm sure, I said. After all, I've apparently done this before. Helen's instruments started beeping frantically. Energy spike in the containment chamber. The gates changing. We rushed to the observation window. The gate's surface had become a maelstrom of impossible colors, its edges bleeding reality, like a wound in the universe. And in its depths, something was taking shape. A message, written in quantum fire. The observer approaches. The circle nears completion. All moments are one moment. Well, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, at least we know they're expecting me. The final hour passed in a frenzy of last-minute checks and calibrations. With each passing minute, the gate's instability grew worse. Reality itself seemed to bend around it, creating distortions in space-time that our instruments could barely measure. Remember, Morrison said as he helped me seal the helmet, you have exactly 43 minutes and 17 seconds before we lose contact. The suit will record everything after that, but you'll be on your own. I checked the recall beacon strapped to my wrist. Such a small device to potentially hold my only way home. And if it doesn't work, then you'd better hope whatever's on the other side is friendly. He handed me a small quantum computer, hardened against dimensional interference. The equations we found, if they really are instructions for building a way back, this should help you decode them. The gate's surface had become a writhing vortex of mathematical impossibilities. Each pulse sent waves of distortion through the facility, making alarms scream and equipment malfunction. We were out of time. Energy levels critical, Helen announced from her station. The quantum barrier is failing. It's now or never. I took a deep breath, feeling the suit adjust to my elevated heart rate. Any last advice? Morrison's expression was unreadable behind his protective visor. Trust your instincts. Something chose you for this, Dr. Chen. Those equations you solved, the entity knowing your name, the messages we found, none of it's coincidence. 30 seconds to barrier failure, Helen warned. I stepped onto the entry platform, watching fractal patterns ripple across the gate's surface. The pull was already strong, like standing at the edge of a cosmic whirlpool. 15 seconds. Dr. Chen, Morrison called out. One more thing. The entity. Before it vanished, it said something in a language we couldn't translate, but the pattern, it sounded like it was counting down. 10 seconds. My hand tightened on the quantum computer. Counting down to what? 5 seconds. I guess you're about to find out. 3, 2, 1. The quantum barrier failed. The gate's pull became irresistible, a force that operated on levels deeper than mere gravity. I had a moment to think about all the versions of myself that had apparently done this before, all leading to this moment. Then I was falling through dimensions that shouldn't exist. The crossing felt like being deconstructed at the quantum level and reassembled by something that only vaguely understood human biology. Colours that had no names in any human language flashed through my consciousness. Geometric shapes folded through impossible dimensions. Time became meaningless. I experienced millennia and microseconds simultaneously. When reality finally stabilized, I found myself standing on a surface that rippled like liquid mathematics. The sky above, if you could call it that, was a tapestry of shifting probabilities, each one showing a different version of history. My suit's sensors were going haywire, detecting physics that shouldn't be possible. The heads-up display flickered with readings that made no sense. Negative gravity, reversed entropy, time flowing in multiple directions at once. Dr. Morrison, I called into my comm unit. This is Chen. Do you copy? Static crackled. Then his voice came through, distorted but understandable. We're receiving you, Dr. Chen. Video feed is active, but corrupted. What do you see? Before I could answer, I saw them. They emerged from behind structures that seemed to fold through dimensions I couldn't comprehend. 3 figures that shifted between states of matter like living quantum superpositions. As they approached, their forms became more defined, though still maddeningly difficult to focus on. And somehow, impossibly, I recognized them. Dr. Chen? Morrison's voice crackled with increasing interference. Report! I'm not alone, I whispered, and I think I've been here before. Welcome back, observer, the closest entity said, its form shifting between states of matter like quantum foam. You have come as predicted. I don't understand, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, memories began flooding back. Memories of other crossings, other versions of myself standing in this exact spot. How many times have I been here? All times or one time, another entity replied, its voice resonating directly in my consciousness. You exist in all moments, simultaneously. What you perceive as separate crossings are merely different facets of the same event. My suit's neural interface was struggling to translate what I was seeing. The entities existed in more dimensions than human minds could process, their true forms hidden behind layers of quantum uncertainty. Dr. Chen? Morrison's voice crackled through increasing interference. We're losing signal integrity. 30 seconds to blackout. The third entity moved closer, its form resolving into something almost human. The network degrades, it said. The spaces between spaces grow unstable. Show her. Reality shifted around us, and suddenly I was standing before a massive structure that dwarfed the gate I'd come through. It was like a window into infinity, its surface showing countless realities bleeding into each other. Our gate, the first entity explained, built to replace the failing network, but it requires a key. The recall beacon, I realized, looking at the device on my wrist. That's what it really is, isn't it? Not a way back, but a way forward. 15 seconds to blackout, Morrison warned. The almost human entity reached out with an appendage that shifted through probability states. You understand? Now why you were chosen. Why all versions of you were chosen. Your mind can comprehend our mathematics. Your consciousness can bridge realities. What happens if I activate it? Connection terminates in 5 seconds. Morrison's voice was barely audible now. Evolution, the entity said simply. The next step in your species' development. The merging of all possible timelines into a single, unified reality. And if I refuse? Signal lost, my comm unit announced, leaving me alone with the entities and my decision. The almost human entity's form stabilized further, revealing a face I recognized from fractured memories, my own, aged by years or centuries, transformed by knowledge no human was meant to possess. You cannot refuse, my other self said, because you already accepted all versions of you, all timelines. The circle must close. I looked at the recall beacon, understanding finally what it truly was. Not a key, but a catalyst for something far larger than myself. My finger moved toward the activation switch as the walls of reality began to crack. The quantum computer Morrison had given me beeped, drawing my attention to calculations I'd written in another timeline. The equations weren't instructions for building a way back. They were warnings. The network isn't failing, I said, stepping back from my future self. You're deliberately destroying it, forcing a convergence of timelines. My other self smiled. Very good. The old network maintained separation between realities, kept humanity fragmented across infinite possibilities. We aim to unite them. Into what? The massive gate pulsed, showing glimpses of transformed worlds. Humanity evolved into beings of pure consciousness, merged with technology, ascending beyond physical form. Into perfection, the first entity said. Your species stands at a crossroads. In some timelines, you destroy yourselves. In others, you stagnate. But in a few, it gestured to my future self. In a few, you become like us. I looked down at the beacon, and this will force that evolution, collapse all timelines into the ones where we transcend. The probability cascade has already begun, my future self said. The only choice now is which reality becomes dominant. But something wasn't right. The quantum computer was picking up underlying patterns in the gate structure patterns that told a different story. You're lying, I said quietly. This isn't about evolution, it's about invasion. The entity's forms flickered with what might have been surprise. My future self's facade cracked, showing something ancient and terrible beneath. The beacon isn't a key, I continued, the real mathematics becoming clear. It's a virus, designed to infect our reality with yours, to overwrite what we are with what you want us to become. We have done this countless times, the entity wearing my face hissed. Across countless realities, your understanding changes nothing. Except I understand something else now. I held up the quantum computer. These equations, they're not just warnings. They're a weapon, written by another version of me, who saw through your deception. The entities moved to stop me, but I had already begun inputting the corrected mathematics. The beacon hummed with new purpose. What are you doing? My false future self demanded. Changing the rules, I said, watching the beacon's quantum signature shift. You're right about one thing. All timelines are connected, which means if I can poison one node in your network. The implications hit them too late. The beacon activated, but not as they had intended. Instead of forcing a convergence, it created a quantum feedback loop. Their gate began to shimmer with unstable energies. You cannot stop what is coming, the entity raged, its borrowed form dissolving. We exist in all realities. Not anymore, I said, running for my gate as their realm began to collapse. I just changed the math. The journey back was worse than the first crossing. Reality itself was unraveling around me. But the suit held together, protecting me as dimensions imploded. I crashed onto the floor of the containment chamber at Area 51. alarms blaring as the gate destabilized. Morrison helped me up as emergency teams rushed in. "Dr. Chen, what happened?" Our readings showed some kind of quantum cascade failure across multiple dimensions. Through the observation window, I watched the gate flicker and die. But before it vanished completely, I caught one last glimpse through it. Other versions of myself in other facilities, making the same choice, closing the doors between realities. "We need to talk," I said, removing my helmet, "about the other gates. All of them. Because they're still out there. And next time..." I thought of the entities trapped now in their own realm by the mathematical barriers I'd created. "Next time we'll be ready."